price you pay to pursue your dreams. Grinding every day to get that dream. Ain't no holding back until you get your shot. One day you're gonna open your eyes and be on top. That's the price you pay to pursue your dreams. Grinding every day to get that dream. Ain't no holding back until you get your shot. One day you're gonna open your eyes and be on top. Been playing this game since I was 10 years of age. I wanted to make my mark ever since my Pop Warner days. When I strapped that helmet, I'm knocking dudes into a blaze. A lockdown corner going all the way through 7th and 8th grade. Entering high school, I'm ready to write another page. Busting my ass and lifting weights. It's a much higher level, but I'm still making plays. No time to party or bask in my glory days. It's college preparatory classes every single day. Living my life with that singular goal. It's the fire inside that makes me whole. Looking in the mirror, my muscles swole. I'm on a mission, and I'm never gonna stop. When the ball's in the air like Sherman, I'm a hawk. And I promise I'll overcome whatever life throws at me.
Okay, good afternoon everyone, and welcome to the Ageless Movement Podcast. I'm your co-host, Scott Lohman. Okay, what we're talking about today, movement disorders. We felt like this was a very relevant topic, not only because of the people that Sang and I work with, but for the country at large right now. There's another surging coronavirus surge through the United States. I don't think we're progressing at the same rate a lot of other places are in the country right now in California, although we are going up. I've been looking at San Joaquin's numbers, they're going up. I think Santa Clara County's numbers were going up. So the writing's on the wall. I guess more people are meeting indoors and more families are getting together, and you're just going to see higher and higher numbers of the coronavirus. And in some states, they just never really went into any real protocols. I think Iowa was one of those states. I believe South Dakota had a really high infection rate. And was it Wyoming or Idaho? One of those states, might be Wyoming. Of all the people that tested there, it was almost like a 50%, 48-something% of people that took the COVID test or testing positive. So it's not looking good in the Midwestern states right now. We felt like it was relevant to start talking about movement disorders because Parkinson's is a really prevalent movement condition in the United States right now. In fact, there's 6 million cases of people that have Parkinson's, and I think before we dive into all these movement disorders, maybe we should just describe what some of them are and what Parkinson's really is, because there isn't really any definitive test that states, oh, you have Parkinson's. There's just a list of symptoms, and oftentimes that's what it is in science and Western medicine. You fit into a box of symptoms and that's what you have, right? Even though it may not be that fundamentally clear that you do have that condition. So, for instance, people that are diagnosed with Parkinson's have certain symptoms. Rounded shoulders, correct? Short, shuffling gait, possibly tremors, difficulties with speaking, problems with balance. Many of them will become just quieter because they have difficulty speaking. Some of them may become socially withdrawal to some degree, although that's not the case with every Parkinson's person. And those are the typical things that you see with Parkinson's, but the way they really know is they test your dopamine levels. And if your dopamine levels have really plummeted down, then they know you probably have Parkinson's because you have all the other symptoms. Now, I feel like it's very relevant to talk about this right now just because of some of the people that we work with and how it relates to COVID, because we have a lot of articles now that are out that are published that are showing evidence that people that have had COVID-19 have higher inflammation, and if that inflammation somehow makes its way into your brain, then the stage is set for you to possibly get Parkinson's or some type of inflammatory neurological disorder that's going to affect your movement. So, what's your feelings on all of this thing?
So for me, the whole like neurological symptoms, like it actually popped up very early on because somebody that I always go to just kind of learn stuff is from Dr. Emily Schlickel. And she put up a post pretty much in the very beginning because she lives in New York, or lived in New York, she's now moved, where she talks about, post-COVID, she has brain fog. So if I can find that link, I will let you preview it on, whenever you have time. But that brain fog and, stuff like that, that's kind of where we kind of worry about like neurological damage. So this was before we were required to wear masks. Like for me, that was instantaneous.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've always been kind of like doing stuff so that I hopefully don't get Parkinson's like my mother has or had. So that's always in the forefront for me. And then for her to come back and talk about that, and I actually took a course with her I think back in August, just recently, where she talks about it again. Even though her symptoms have gotten better, she still has it. And here we are like many months out and she's still experiencing these things. So that's the other thing. It's not something that might happen instantaneously. It could be years down the line. So that's why, making sure like you don't get COVID has been a big thing for us.
And I think we should explain to everyone listening right now that loss of taste, loss of smell, those are neurological symptoms. That's your nervous system at work. And if they're not functioning properly, that's an indication of a much larger issue happening. Now, it doesn't seem like much. Oh, I lost my taste, I lost my smell for a while. That is really nothing to sneeze at, literally, because it can definitely lead to other neurological symptoms that could be a lot more serious and debilitating. And typically, you could just go over so many movement disorders, and they all sort of fall under this neurological damage / inflammatory disease, or even autoimmune is how I would describe it. So, and I warn everyone that's out there that's maybe a skeptic. I have 2 clients I work with right now. One of them has Parkinson's. The other one does not have Parkinson's. The other one had Guillain-Barré, and it really started from a mosquito bite. And this isn't to freak you out. Most mosquitoes that bite you aren't going to give you this.
It's a very small percentage.
It's a small percentage, but lucky him, he was that small, percentage.
Traveling?
He was traveling. He was in Europe at the time. I believe he was in France. And the point that I'm trying to make here is that he, to this day, has multiple movement disorders. He's doing well. He's, getting stronger by the day. He's got a surgery coming up that hopefully is going to help him. But my point is, his life has been changed dramatically in the last 2 years.
And he's young.
And this isn't just and what I'm trying to tell you is, I know this sounds like it is anecdotal evidence in my own experience, but the point is, I work with people like this all the time. And this can happen to you. So you definitely want to protect yourself and avoid, even creating the scenario in which you get inflammation in your body much higher than you would have right now. And like I said, as it works its way to your brain, that's when anything can happen. And there's actual evidence of this in articles. Should we show some of the articles?
Well, so just to go back, when
Yes.
we talk about inflammation of the brain, like that's another thing. Kind of going into COVID, one of the things that increased was people drinking alcohol. That will cause inflammation.
Sure.
And then also the diet, like everybody, they feel like they need comfort food. And so that's increased, and that can also potentially cause inflammation too. So
Yeah. Sugar is definitely not the thing to eat with inflammation.
yeah. So, there's a lot of things that you can do. And then the other thing that we find a lot is, I stand in lines in a lot of places, and everyone talks about how they haven't worked out ever since we went into shelter. And that's the other thing, if you're not moving, you're not getting, you're not creating like aerobic
Cardiovascular
Yeah.
things, yeah.
So then that becomes that kind of opens the door too.
And then, now, some of these symptoms we're talking about with brain fog also had to do with depression as well. So a lot of these symptoms, you shouldn't just act like they're not really a big deal, because they could be a big deal. And if you've noticed any major changes in your movement, say you go for a walk and you start limping, or your partner that you go walk with starts to notice some movement disorders, don't just act like it's no big deal. If you haven't had a fall or an injury, or maybe you've had a persistent shoulder injury or a neck injury and you're not really sure how you did it, if enough months go by and it's not better, there's a reason why it's not getting better. And you should explore all options in that regard.
Yeah, so this is an article from November 5th, so not that long ago.
Yeah, there's a lot of up-to-date data right now.
Yeah, and I was recently looking into this just because last weekend I actually took a course with Dr. Carl Sterling, and it was called Parkinson's Regeneration. And so as I was sitting there in his course, it prompted a lot of questioning in my head. And the great part is he has connections with a lot of people in Mexico, and there are a lot of doctors in, doing these presentations. And so I started looking into it, and then all of a sudden, all these articles showed up within a couple weeks of that workshop. So, like I said, this one's from November 15th, where it talks about COVID-19 linked to the increased risk of Parkinson's. The person who seems to have brought this to the forefront is Patrick Bundin,
Yeah.
and he's the director for the Center of Neurological Degenerative Science in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Yeah.
Okay. There's another article from Michigan that I didn't pull up.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that's where he was from, so that makes sense why that site had this information.
And you notice this too, neurological disorders and stroke, David Beckham. Beckham. Oh, it is Beckham. Not the soccer player.
Yeah, and that's the other group of people we work with, are people who've had strokes. The good part is a lot of the people we've worked with who've had strokes, I think for you, you've had people kind of do a major turnaround. I mean, not completely.
Okay, so yeah, let me just step in on that one. So you're right. I have had people that I've worked with that have had strokes that have made complete recoveries.
Mm-hmm. They're not that many.
I was just going to say,
a few.
Doesn't mean they're exactly like they were before their stroke.
Right.
They're not.
Yeah.
But they can move well. They got back their level of function. They can speak clearly. They have good cognitive clarity. Just like with my knee injuries, exactly like it was before the surgery, before I injured myself. Not exactly, but I can do all the things I was doing before my accident and my surgery. So it's the same kind of thing. You have to kind of look at things. You have to navigate your way through changes that happen to your body, and this is a good example of it. So I've had several people I've worked with that have had strokes, some that have made excellent recoveries, and others that have improved slowly over time. So you should never figure what category you're going to be in a situation like that. You have to compartmentalize and just focus day to day on your short-term goals. Okay, so this is impacting not only Parkinson's, but and I figured movement disorders was the best topic for today because that includes stroke as well. And what is a stroke? It's neurological damage. It's the fact that some blood didn't get, so we'll say this, vital supplies of oxygen from blood, from arteries, somehow wasn't able to properly feed your brain. It's that simple. And if all those arteries are there for a reason. It's not like a typical vein where there's just not that much blood involved, but with an artery, a major artery, oh man, that can do incredible damage to your brain.
Yeah, and that's what we're talking about is, COVID being a respiratory illness.
But it can be a brain illness too, depending on the after effects of it.
Yes, so basically in the cases, they were studying 35, 45, and 58-year-olds, so you can be pretty much
These aren't old people, that's just pointing out,
He adds that Parkinson's is normally a very slow developing disease, which, before this we've seen I know for us, and once again, it's anecdotal and I get it, but we've watched people on the other side on the screen be completely different than they were when they were working with us in person.
Yeah, that is true.
So, you know, so he continues, but these cases, something happened very quickly. So
it basically progressed the inflammation to the brain and progressed the neurological condition or decline.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of this goes into that he believes COVID-19 may make patients more likely to develop Parkinson's disease either sooner or later.
Yeah, and this is really good too. It may be that a younger patient will recover from the infection, but be left with neurological symptoms such as brain fog and depression. So don't ever downplay any of these symptoms. We know that this can happen in long term in terms of COVID. It's consistent with brain damage, and maybe even Parkinson's disease will develop later. So these are things to really think about. Another reason why you don't want to catch this. Okay, so the other thing I wanted to just briefly mention is getting to the next article here. You know, there are other movement disorders that can happen to people. You also have multiple sclerosis.
I noticed that one's popped up a lot in
yes,
groups.
it really has. Now, here's the thing. Parkinson's is really unique in the sense that, and this is where we talk about a collection of symptoms. Everything that I mentioned before, the rounding shoulders, the shuffling gait, possible tremors, things of that nature, definitely low dopamine puts you in the Parkinson's category. Now, what sets Parkinson's, I would say, separate from so many other movement disorders is we know for a fact explosive movement helps Parkinson's. It slows the rate of decline. We also know being sedentary and not doing anything about it rapidly increases the decline, the physical decline associated with Parkinson's. So we see this all the time. People come into our class, they're shuffling in their gait, they're having difficulty walking in and not tripping on things. They work with us for an hour, and by the end of class, they're walking almost normal, what you would consider normal.
Yeah, I mean, and for me, like that example, I talk a lot about it. I had a 92-year-old client that you could see that in, and that was somebody who got hurt in the service. He had a railroad tie rod fall on his knee. So somebody who had pain, he would still come to me and work on stuff. And even if I couldn't get him to move his lower body, I would have him still do throws with his upper body, and he would walk out like a brand new person.
Yeah.
So that
it's a
part was
thing to
really
see.
cool. Yeah, I mean, that's the one thing, like that's the great part I think about working with people who have Parkinson's is like we can make that change happen, especially if they're willing to put in the work. Like I feel like we get to see it instantaneously as they walk out the door. The fun part, the not so fun part is when they come in dragging.
Yeah,
that
or
means they didn't keep up with what we did.
Correct. Or we don't see them for 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, a year, and all of a sudden it's like, oh my goodness, can we bring them back?
Yeah.
And that's always the challenge. You know, I'll be honest with you, some people are really resilient. They bounce back in a matter of a month or two. Other people never really come back to the level of function they were at before. And that's why, you know, persistence is the most important thing. Compartmentalize your life. Focus on what you have control over, and think about what you have to do this week. Don't think so much about 10 years from now. Think about this week, because if you keep doing what you're supposed to do every single week, month after month, it becomes year after year, and you're way ahead of where you would have been if you didn't do all those steps. And one thing I want to touch on with MS. Now, I have worked with people with MS. With MS, everything isn't quite as clear as Parkinson's. What do we do know? We do know there's an optimal level of training for people with multiple sclerosis. You don't do enough, there's rapid decline. You do too much, that person will have difficulty moving and symptoms. So you have to find that happy medium. The beauty about Parkinson's is it's like you're training an athlete. You can really throw a lot at them. Now, that doesn't mean they should overtrain. It just means they can train or work up to a high level. Now, oftentimes, you have so many different movement disorders that can spawn from what we talked about: stroke, Parkinson's, MS. But MS is interesting because there is a case that you can get called transverse myelitis. That basically means is they find lesions. Now, here's the thing, how do they find the lesions? They put you on a CAT scan, and they can actually see the lesions, especially they look at your white matter. But here's the thing, what leads a person to get assessed that way? Typically what you'll find is somebody will have difficulty walking. Maybe they'll have falls that they never had before. They might experience a rapid decline in quality of movement. So they go to the doctor, and the doctors always want to check for Parkinson's and MS. I mean, that's always the first things, but you won't always get these instant answers. You might not have low dopamine levels, so they'll do a CAT scan. And when they do the CAT scan, they'll find, yeah, there's lesions. That's transverse myelitis. Now, here's the thing. Transverse myelitis is really tricky. Some people get to the point of where they're so physically disabled they have to be in wheelchairs. Now, here's the thing. It's not necessarily a progressive condition at all. A lot of people make a complete recovery and they never have a problem after that. Other people don't recover or don't recover 100%. So, once again, if you ever find yourself in that situation where you do have a transverse myelitis diagnosis, don't freak out. It doesn't mean that this is going to be, your future. There's a lot of things that you can do to reverse that trend. Now, oftentimes that will lead to multiple sclerosis, but as you know, there's been a lot of people that have had MS, even stars, that have kind of gone up and down. I remember there was a famous dancer and singer, Lola Falana. She had it at one point so bad she could hardly move. And then a year later, I'm seeing her dancing and performing at a really high level. Now, I've known a person that I was very close to, probably over a decade ago or more, and she had periods what she would refer to as an exacerbation during, having MS, and then 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, a year later, she's a lot more functional. And what she found was that she has a very structured life. Of course, diet's a huge part of it. Sleep is important, but also exercise. And when she had optimal levels of exercise, her exacerbations would happen less frequently. So there's hope. Exercise can help every condition. It's just we talk about Parkinson's a lot because it's so responsive to exercise. Okay, next one.
So this article is a little bit later. It's actually from September 24th, where it's actually goes back to Dr. Brendan, who talks about the wave of neurological conditions, including Parkinson's disease, which coronavirus might cause. So this one, in the beginning, talks about the 5 years after the Spanish flu pandemic in 1910. There was up to a 3-fold increase in the incidence of Parkinson's disease.
So for those of you that maybe aren't 100% sure about the Spanish flu, so basically during the end of the World War I, the Spanish flu started. Most pandemic experts and disease specialists believe it started in Kansas in a military base. And what they think happened was a human had a common flu. There was a bird that had a typical avian flu. And they both infected a pig at the same time. Now that's how a lot of these pandemics happen. And then the proteins on both of these flus are different. So when that pig gets that flu and we eat that pig, which is probably what happened in the Spanish flu, suddenly our immune systems couldn't recognize it because it wasn't the typical flu. It wasn't the typical avian bird flu. So all of a sudden, because our immune systems couldn't figure out what it was, it ran rampant. And, it killed like 8 million people on the Western Front, towards the end of World War I. And after 2 years, it literally made its way to every corner of the earth. millions and millions of people died of the Spanish flu, and I believe 750,000 Americans died. And it started here in America, but they called it the Spanish flu.
Yeah, so this article also talks about the smell test screening to pick up early signs of disease. And it is good to get a diagnosis early on and not to ignore anything that might, you just think, oh, it's part of old age, because I get that all the time. Oh, it's just part of getting old. Because honestly, it's better to get treatment and deal with that kind of stuff than to have this huge, fast decline happen. So really pay attention to what's going on, especially now. You might notice things.
Smell tests is really important. Smell and taste tests. There's a reason why you've lost that capability.
So here we go, about the 6 million people worldwide have Parkinson's disease, and the figure is expected to double in the next 20 years.
So imagine that 12 million people are going to be walking around with Parkinson's possibly.
I screwed up, because the other thing is the person who talks about this being a silent wave is actually a different expert. He is, where did he go? Right, I mean, like right now, so many people are talking about this that.
Yeah, and I realize there's a lot of different opinions about this, but I really wouldn't treat this like it's like it's no big deal. Most people, I think, are taking this seriously, but
that was Kevin Barnum from the Florey Institute of Neuroscience and Mental Health. So he's the one who's calling it a silent wave. From Parkinson's News Today, October 28th, they are also talking about COVID infection may raise risk of Parkinson's, and it's all from pretty much the same person.
So what it basically does is it just creates the perfect storm for inflammation and neurological damage that can lead to Parkinson's.
Yeah, so there's a lot of studies and a lot of writings on this.
And we've seen these 3 separate cases, what, in Brazil, Israel, and Spain?
Yes, so other countries that are, I think, ahead of us when it comes to this COVID curve, and they're more proactive than we are. Well, at least Spain seems to be.
Well, yeah, they also have single-payer healthcare systems, too, which make it easier for them to get treatment to all of their population.
And actually, on that note, this is why we should care what's going on in our healthcare system.
Yeah, very true.
Because what you may not feel is affecting you now. Like, I don't need healthcare. You might need it in the near future or even in the distant future. So we should all be caring about what our healthcare looks like and how it's being provided to us.
Well, that's really interesting too. If anything, this pandemic has exposed the holes in our healthcare system, which there are many, also in our economic system as well. I mean, our country is in free fall right now economically because of this pandemic.
Yeah, somewhere in here, I mean, I pulled up so many articles that it actually does talk about the economic effects of Parkinson's, and you know, because I sat with that group out of Mexico, like that, I feel like it's like their second financial economic issue is trying to care for people with Parkinson's.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So it's a big deal in other places, and there's no cure. There's no cure. So this is why we have to do what we can in order to make sure that our brain health is good as we age.
And just so you know, so brain health, you know, there's so many things you can do for brain health. Obviously, cardiovascular exercise is excellent because you get plenty of oxygen to the brain. You also, strength is good too. You want to be able to increase muscular strength, more contractile protein, which increases your metabolic rate and makes you function and leaner. You'll be a lot healthier. Your quality of movement will improve. And that's the big thing as we get older. So many people don't take care of their muscle mass or never really worked on it through their life course. And then when they get older, it really massively decreases.
So, of course, I was sitting right on the article.
Yeah, sometimes we have this. We're trying to work different things at the same time.
May 21st of this year, basically, in the National Institute of Health, that's where they talk about the contact of humankind with severe acute respiratory syndrome, COVID, will have both immediate and long-term consequences, not only for medicine and economics, but also for culture and politics. So everything we've talked about thus far, and I'm sure the whole is even bigger than that. That is just about how much time we have to cover it. Yeah. But there's a lot to this. It's not just, oh, I'm sick. And then here we talked about the predictors of COVID-19 and the outcome in Parkinson's. So we have a lot of people who are predisposed, and that's one thing that I know some of the groups that I'm in right now, there's only 12% of the population that is metabolically healthy. So with that, here we are, we're talking about being in shelter, but yet very few people are talking about how are we going to get healthy.
And that's a good point.
And be serious about it, not just talk about it.
Correct. And I understand a lot of the criticisms about sheltering in place and not being fully open. They're very, there's a lot of negative side effects of this. There's depression, there's people getting deconditioned to the point of where they're becoming very unhealthy. All of those are very true and very relevant, and I'm certainly, that's not on deaf ears. And I really think, for the most part, we've been able to keep a lot of businesses open by just simply adhering to the CDC guidelines, wearing a mask, hand sanitizer, making sure you're cleaning everything you touch before and after. I could honestly say, in the one-on-one training that I'm still doing now, nobody's gotten sick. And nobody's gotten sick because the people I work with are staying away from large crowds of people. They're not taking any unnecessary chances, and they're wearing a mask, such as I'm doing the same. I'm doing the same myself. And I'm also constantly cleaning the whole entire environment, constantly. Now, I know long-term that may not be the healthiest thing to do, because
it's a balance.
Yeah, it is a balance, because we're not being exposed to bacteria at this point, because we're literally killing everything. But for now, this is what we have to do to avoid this virus. And the virus doesn't have the ability to survive disinfectant and even hot sun, all kinds of things like that. So there's a lot of smart decisions that you can make to avoid catching it. And honestly, I felt like since this whole thing started, you and I have been pretty healthy. I mean, I'm normally a person that gets 2 or 3 colds a year. I'm not kidding. That's normal for me. And I think I've had, the last cold I had was in December of last year. So, just saying.
And who did you catch that from?
Yeah, of course. Well, that's a whole nother show.
And I mean, when we talk about like what can be and can't be done, I mean, like, I'm so fortunate that I actually traveled during this time, and I literally went into
2 COVID tests, negative.
Before I had to have a COVID test before I saw my dad, and then I made sure to get another one once I returned. I was on a plane. I mean, like, even though they tell you, you can take your mask off to eat, and then, you know, some people literally will take their mask off for an hour to eat. I literally, every bite, my mask went back on, I chewed my food, and then I took it off to take my next bite. Like, I was not going to mess around. I'm like, you can interpret whatever you want.
Yeah, understandable.
But I'm going to do my own interpretation.
And that's the thing. When you're up in the air like that, the air is being recirculated, because you can't just open a window at 35,000 feet. It doesn't work. I tried that once. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, so, and then the other thing you do have to understand, the airline companies are doing a good job of cleaning all these seats, cleaning inside the planes, cleaning inside. We're all doing a good job that are running businesses. All the supermarkets, everyone. And you have to do your job as a consumer as well. When you see that hand sanitizer, use it when you walk in that store.
And that hand hand sanitizer might not be there.
Yes.
So you have to carry your own.
Yeah, carry your own.
I mentioned this a while
Correct,
back.
yeah.
Like when everywhere you go, you have something in your pocket for these occasions.
True. But I'm just reinforcing that notion that when you do walk into a store, sanitize yourself. When you walk out of the store, sanitize yourself.
Yeah,
It's working, you know, because no one's gotten sick that I've worked with, and I haven't gotten sick myself, so.
Yeah, so this one is a little bit more information. It was published August 20th of this year in nature.com, and it talks about the ACE2 enzyme. So if you're like completely into dissecting science, this article is very in-depth. I assume most people aren't, but I'm going to drop it in the comment section. Just in case there might be somebody.
Yeah, and the other thing I want to add before we start to wrap things up here is that there are going to be pandemics in the future. It's unavoidable. If you ever want to learn more, Netflix has a really good documentary on different things, and I got to think of the name of it. It'll come to me in a second. But Vox, I think, is the media company that sponsors it. And they have a different topic every week. It's every season. They have maybe 8 episodes. And every week there's different things. And they talked about a potential pandemic a year ago. And I'm watching it, and they did I watched it last night, and they did talk about the Spanish flu. Now, they didn't spend a whole lot of time on it, but they did explain how pandemics start. And animals obviously have a lot of other viruses that we don't even know about. I think there's 3,000 that we know about, and there could be potentially 1.1 million of them out there. And we're not just talking bats, we're talking chimpanzees. It's unbelievable what can potentially happen. Yeah, I'll tell you. So we joked about weasels. So weasels and birds are not good to place together. And the reason is birds have all kinds of flus. Everyone knows this now, it's no mystery. The problem is weasels can get all the diseases that we get, all the viruses we get. The difference is most of them are going to be asymptomatic, so they look healthy. And then you eat that weasel, and guess what? Now you have some exotic flu that the bird managed to pass on to the weasel, and the weasel's immune system made it probably more dangerous. And then we just ate the weasel, and now our immune systems can't figure out what it is. And then we infect somebody else, and before you know it, you got a pandemic. It's literally, that's all it takes. And it's one of those things where we didn't have a pandemic for 102 years in America that was out of control, of course. There was Ebola that made it to the US, but you know, Ebola is much easier to deal with because it has such severe symptoms and it happens so rapidly. So it's easy to quarantine people. But with COVID, what's making this so bad is so many people have it and have very mild symptoms, or they don't have any symptoms. And on average, they'll infect 3 people. So you could just see how scores and scores of people are carrying this around. And then every now and then, somebody who's very vulnerable will get this, and their chances of surviving are much lower than somebody who's healthier. So just keep that in mind. Pandemics are not totally unavoidable. They can happen, and we have to be prepared. All right, that sounds like a good way to end this.
I don't know.
You got more to add?
Well, I'm just excited that Biden put together his coronavirus team, and my favorite is on there, which is Osterholm.
Yeah, that's a good sign that Osterholm's on there. He's a professor, epidemiologist at the University of Minnesota. So, yeah, he's very knowledgeable. If you want to learn more about him, Joe Rogan did like a 3-hour interview with him, and it's really, really good.
And he had a book come out. I can't remember if it was last year or the beginning of this pandemic.
I think it was a few months before the pandemic.
Yeah. So
it's worth checking out. Dr. Osterholm. Just go to YouTube, type in Dr. Osterholm, Joe Rogan. In fact, I'll leave the link there for you, and then I'll leave links in the comment section of all these articles as well.
And then just in case you find yourself trying to deal with any type of moving disorder, there's some resources. This one comes from the UK. It's the Parkinsons organization. And it's just understanding coronavirus and Parkinson's. And this one was written November 9th. So lots of resources out there.
Very up to date.
Yeah. very relevant.
Sure.
That is it.
All right, sounds good, baby. You did good research this week.
That's what happens when you go to learn, things just start sparking.
Yeah.
That's why it's good to constantly learn something new.
That is true. And, you know, writing's very good. Reading's great, but writing is really good. If you can write a short story or, hell, write a novel. Maybe you wanted to write a novel and you just didn't think you could do it. Try it. Yeah. It's like watching a movie as you type. It's fun. You
don't have to print it. It's just for
you.
It
could be for you, or maybe you do want to publish it one day. Also, music's good if you have any music interest at all. You don't have to be great, and I really hate how annoying that is when someone's singing and you hear somebody else say,
right.
You know what?
They would never do it.
You know, don't discourage that person from pursuing something they love. So what if they're not great at it? So what if they're not even good at it? It doesn't mean that it's not good for them.
Somebody else might like it.
Yeah, and they might get really good over time. So don't discourage people from doing things that are maybe out of their normal purview. Okay? Please, try it. Try music. Try
dance.
Yeah, try dancing too. I'm not a good dancer, but I sure like to dance sometimes. And I have
we had a section earlier this week.
There we go.
As soon as a song came on, we were like, oh, this one. That was our song.
It was a banger, for real.
We did it twice.
It was a banger. It was a great song. So that's my point. Don't discourage people from doing things that make them balanced, okay? And I don't know what it is with people. Like, if you're not Whitney Houston or John Legend, why are you singing? I mean, come on. It's a bunch of crap. Stop discouraging people, okay? That's the other take-home message. Encourage. Be positive. All right? Okay, everyone, signing off. We'll see you probably in a week. Well, yeah, in a week. Well,
yeah, we were just off because I was in training last week.
Yeah, there was a lot going on last weekend. And, you know, I don't like to do a podcast if we're not really thoroughly prepared for it. So, as you can see, we had a lot of content today. All right, everyone, take care. And don't forget to like our video if you liked it, and subscribe. And if you can share it, go right ahead. It's really easy. You just go to the share section of the video and share it on Facebook or Twitter or whatever you're on, okay? All right, everyone. Oh, and questions and comments, please leave them. We'll answer them, all right? Okay, take care, everyone.